book about givers and takers, and you can identify a giver or taker in some ways by what they do when they have power. Who makes a better leader, givers or takers, and who ends up as leaders?
Well, I think that's the paradox, right? So we have a wealth of evidence that givers are better leaders than takers. Takers tend to be overconfident. They swing for the fences, and they end up often taking unnecessary risks, and they have more fluctuating volatile performance. If you track what happens to their company's total shareholder returns or return on assets, there's some really fun hedge fund data that if you're a taker in the hedge fund industry, and one of the ways they score that is by when you're in a job interview, they videotape that, and then they see whether you smile at somebody else's misfortune. So like Schadenfreude and takers do that more. They're excited to see other people fail because they think that means they get to succeed. They actually have over 10 years significantly lower returns. But in the leadership context, takers aren't just overconfident. They also tend to squash other people's ideas. They leave other people feeling devalued. They have a very hard time hanging on to talent because if you're a star and somebody is constantly exploiting you, what do? You take the first opportunity that you have to work somewhere else, great, and you leave. So givers are great leaders in the sense that they focus on lifting other people up rather than cutting others down. They're constantly developing the people below them, but they often miss out on leadership opportunities because they don't do the degree of self-promotion that's necessary to get on the radar in the first place.
What's good, everybody? This is Court here, checking in with you guys. If you're new to Ghost Town Underground, first of all, welcome. Subscribe to the channel and get locked in so we can see what's going on here in the upcoming future. But this is where we slow down conversation. This is where we look underneath the hood, go under the surface, and we analyze conversations between people, conversations between entities, and really try to understand what is going on rather than just focusing on. So here we don't argue personality. We don't try to argue thoughts. We try to find a way to all and understand the environment that caused us to maybe think differently than each other. And today we're tackling something subtle, I would say, but I dare say also very important. And that's this. We live in a culture where the loudest signal is often mistaken for the strongest. And if someone speaks the most, we assume that they're leading. If someone commands the room socially, we assume that they're dominant. And if someone is highly expressive, we assume that they're confident. And we link that with stability. But research complicates that assumption. And in 2011, a study published in the Academy of Management Journal by Professor Adam Grant, who is a professor at the University of Philadelphia, Wharton School of Business, him and his colleagues did some research and they found out this very interesting information around the subject of introverts and extrovert leaders. Extroverted leaders may be more effective with employees who are passive, whereas introvert leaders may be more effective with employees who are proactive. So let's pause on that for a hot second. And again, let's establish something real quick. This is not a conversation about superiority, right? So this isn't a, who's better, extroverts or introverts. No, this is more so let's try to align on ideas and understand the differences between the two types of person. And in one of the last videos we put out on the channel, we started touching on how certain personality traits show up in dating dynamics and discussing how, you know, sometimes male nerds struggle in the dating world. And we're trying to take that conversation a step further, but do it in a way that I feel like maybe is original, right? And so we're trying to connect leadership research to relationship outcomes. So the thesis for today is quite simple, and this is what it is. The traits that sustain leadership in complex environments are the same traits that sustain healthy relationships. And those traits are more commonly associated with introversion more than extroversion, right? So again, this is not an anti-extrovert conversation. No, this is just analyzing the system, going a step deeper under the surface and trying to break it down properly so that we can. So before we compare anything, we need to establish commonality and shared language, like we've done in the past. And psychologists often describe personality using the Big Five personality framework. And that's one of the most widely validated models in behavioral science today. And the five traits are this: openness to experience. So, this is curiosity, imagination, and intellectual exploration, consciousness. So, this is linked to discipline, reliability, and impulse control. Extroversion. So, this is sociability, assertiveness, and stimulation seeking. We've got agreeableness, and that's empathy, cooperation, and trust. And then neuroticism. That's sensitivity to stress and negative emotion. So when we talk about introverts and extroverts, we're actually really focusing on one dimension within that model, and that's just extrovert. And again, we're establishing some baselines here. Introversion does not mean antisocial. And that is something that gets misinterpreted and misunderstood so much about introverts. One, myself being a fellow introvert, can attest to that. But it typically does correlate with a lower need for stimulation, preference for depth over breadth. So basically, we like quality over quantity. Energy restoration typically happens through solitude for us. We like to operate with reflective processing, so we take our time with decision making, basically. And we rely on a more measured type of communication. So we tend to like to think about things before we say it. Not saying that other people don't do that, but this is just traits that are highly associated with introverts, right? Um, and so on the other side, extroversion, that correlates more so with expressiveness, social initiation, positive affect. So this is a tendency to experience and express positive emotions. You also have reward sensitivity. So responsiveness to external rewards and stimulation, and also dominance signaling. So again, neither side is morally superior, but they do regulate differently. Introverts regulate inwardly, extroverts regulate outwardly. So the question becomes at this point, which regulation style scales better under complexity? And before I try to explain that, I want you guys to listen again to Professor Adam Grant directly before I continue. So let's do that real quick.
Who makes better leaders, introverts or extroverts?
So I did some research on this a few years ago with a couple of colleagues, and we found that there was no difference overall in the effectiveness of introverted and extroverted leaders if you actually track the performance of their teams and their companies. But we found that whether introverts are more effective or less effective depends on the kinds of employees they had. So extroverts were better leaders with sort of reactive followers, people who are looking for direction from above. Because if I'm an extroverted leader, I'm like, all right, I'm going to get you excited and fired up, and then you're ready to follow the direction I've created. Introverted leaders actually were more effective, though, with proactive employees. So if you've got a whole team of people who are bringing ideas and suggestions to the table, who are taking initiative, extroverted leaders tended to feel threatened by that. They're like, hey, don't steal my spotlight. I'm in charge here. And that had two negative effects. One was it shut those people's ideas down, which meant the extroverted leaders didn't hear as many ideas. And two, they left their people feeling demotivated. Felt like, yeah, I had these thoughts. I thought they were good, and you kind of you dismissed me. The introverts were much more likely to listen and make people feel valued and get better ideas. And I think we're living in a world now where we need more proactivity from employees, right? As the world is more dynamic and competitive, you can't, as a leader, see everything that's going to happen, that's going to affect the fate of your company. And so, given that proactive employees are more important than ever before, I think introverts are going to be more effective leaders than ever before.
So what?
Grant's findings were precise. In proactive environments, where people bring ideas, challenge assumptions, and operate very well independently, introverted leaders often outperform extroverted ones. And you got to ask yourself the question, why is that? Very simple, because they listen. They typically don't feel threatened by their subordinates and coworkers and colleagues, and they integrate very well rather than trying to dominate the scenario. And that distinction becomes critical when systems become more complex. So let's try to build this bridge very carefully between uh, this topic as it pertains to the business world and the dating and relationship. Modern professional environments have definitely changed. We now operate in knowledge economies, right? So teams are flatter, employees are definitely more educated, and initiatives scale upward, not just downward. And definitely now that we have AI, the ability for an individual to um, have a higher level of output is is a thing now, right? So in instances like this, leadership is less about command and more about integration, less about performance and more about regulation. So let's shift the lenses to relationships really quickly. Right now, we're trying to build that bridge. Modern relationships are no longer rigid hierarchies. We're seeing dual income households, higher education rates, delayed marriage timelines, and negotiated roles, right? Versus the traditional standard you do this, I do that, me man, you woman. And emotional literacy expectations are higher, right? In relationships now require financial coordination more so than they did in the past. Career trade-offs because both mom and dad, you know, man or woman, husband or wife, we're both probably working. Geography, mobility decisions. So basically, where are we living? Where where is it best for us to establish roots? Where is it best for us to work? And also, where's best for the children if that's something that we have or you aspire to, right? Um, Emotional co-regulation. So basically, you just don't have to regulate your own emotions. You got to also be able to regulate your partner's emotions, and then regulate yours in relation to theirs. That's not necessarily simple, and that's an ongoing dance within itself. Um, Long-term planning is definitely more of a requirement, and again, all these things are not simple, and this is very much an example of a very complex system, which dating and relationship and marriage is, right? Um, Two individuals with independent goals operating within a shared structure, right? And again, that's pretty much like a business. And like people say all the time, marriage is a business. And systems begin to fail when individuals stop operating in alignment with one each other, and then also they stop aligning with the system that they're a part of as well too. Um, and again, the same traits that allow a leader to manage proactive teams. So listening, ego regulation, patience under challenge are actually the same traits that require you that allow you to sustain a healthy relationship without friction, right? So that's kind of where we can start seeing the parallel, actually. So let's try to continue to establish this balance. Extroversion strongly predicts leader emergence. Yes, extroverts are more likely to be perceived as leaders. So visibility matters. And in dating, extroverts often gain more early access because of that visibility, right? And so how that translates is they have access to a larger network, or they just seek a larger network. They have higher approach rates because they signal more, or they seek outside stimuli, so they're going to seek that and increase their approach rate manually, right? And they have a greater level of expressiveness. So they will show their emotion outwardly much more easier. And even with that advantage, we actually see that introverts and extroverts actually form relationships at a very similar rate. Both can experience satisfaction. And again, this isn't a conversation about superiority or who's better, this or that. It's about understanding what phase you're in, what stage you're in, and where you are, right? So emergence, right? So the ability to be seen doesn't necessarily mean you're more effective. And having access to more groups or organizations or systems um, doesn't necessarily mean that you have a higher level of foundation, right? And systems established. And attraction does not correlate with being sustainable, right? So the prettier you are, the more handsome you are, the more attractive you are, it doesn't necessarily. And now that we've kind of done that, done all that talking and building the framework and the connecting the pieces, let's kind of see where the overlap is now. And let's look at a couple of different areas, right? So first being listening and responsiveness, right? Grant's research shows that introvert leaders allow proactive ideas to surface. And in relationships, responsiveness predicts satisfaction and stability. So, listening and being able to listen well, that's a desired trait and very scalable. Lower impulsivity. Extroversion correlates with sensation seeking, right? And that's very useful for initiation of things, right? But impulsivity can destabilize long term systems if left unmanaged and unchecked. And introverted traits often align more so with consistency and deliberation. So, thinking through things, right? Analyzing process, and that stability scales also. Now, in the area of ego regulation, proactive environments challenge authority. Proactive partners will also challenge assumptions. And leaders who don't feel threatened tend to scale better. And at the same time, partners that don't feel threatened by the other also tend to scale better as well too, because systems fail when ego overrides the function and the outcome, the objective of that system. Now, on to the next, depth orientation. Introverts often prefer fewer but deeper bonds. So their social circle around them is smaller, but most likely they can count more on that social circle than maybe an extrovert that has like 1,000 friends, right? Long-term systems definitely reward depth in that area, right? And shallow intensity burns fast. And even in that instance, again, depth is more sustainable. So let's bring this to real world dating dynamics. People often say they want someone who listens, someone who understands, someone who is emotionally stable, and someone with a little bit of depth to them, right? But those traits don't signal very well early in dating interactions, right? But in early stage dating interactions, attraction tends to reward more expressiveness, more confidence signaling, and social energy and immediate presence. So, earlier in the dating process, more extroverted traits are actually what people gravitate to and notice first. So, what we're seeing isn't necessarily deception in that regard. It's more so signaling, right? Introverted traits often present as quiet, reserved, less immediately dominant. And in fast paced environments like dating apps, social media, social settings, things of that nature, those traits often are undervalued. But it's not because they actually lack value, it's because they don't signal as loudly as the opposite. And at the same time, introversion is very much misunderstood. It gets confused with, being passive, a lack of assertiveness, or just a general sense of avoidance. But healthy introversion isn't actually withdrawal, it's selective engagement, it's measured response, and it's choosing clarity over just simple reaction. And again, real assertiveness isn't very loud, it's direct, it's controlled, it's grounded, and it's very intentional. And the same traits that allow someone to operate effectively in business environments translate directly into conflict resolution, decision making, long term emotional stability. So the better question isn't who gets chosen first. The question we should be asking is, are we measuring the right traits for the right stage? And why that matters today, right? Let's bring this to 2026, right? And talk about, work and relationships in this, right? In the workspace. Remote and hybrid work dominate industries now thanks to technology, and definitely now thanks to AI. And async communication now definitely rewards more clarity over volume, and AI tools increase the value of independent thinking. Proactive teams are now the norm, right? And so comparing that to relationships, the median marriage age is continuing to rise. Dual income households require a higher level of coordination, and the cost of living demands more financial discipline. Emotional intelligence is now a requirement, not just something that used to be optional back in the day. And being able to resolve conflict, not just being able to be charismatic, is actually a better prediction on relationship outcomes, right? Modern systems increasingly reward regulation, patience, listening, and integration. So, if you're an introverted man, even an introverted woman, because this message it's applicable to both, who feels overlooked in early dating environments, understand something. Nothing's really wrong with you. You may be optimizing for a different phase, a different stage, a different environment, a different system. And so don't change who you are, right? Continue to be who you are, but understand what environment you are currently in and make the adjustment, right? Dating apps. If you're there, they understand this. They reward display. They don't really reward depth and, and things of that nature, right? Life rewards durability, and complexity rewards regulation. So understand this: delayed recognition does not equal diminished value. It's just that you need to, again, understand where you are. And once you understand that, that's actually where you start getting leverage in the systems and the areas that you're in. So remember this: the loudest voice isn't always the one that sustains the room. Charisma attracts attention, but that's it. Regulation builds structure, and that's what can withstand time, right? And tear. And relationships, like organizations, are structured. So the real question, again, isn't who looks impressive, an introvert or that extrovert. It's who scales better under pressure, that introvert that you're overlooking, or that extrovert that you got your eyes on. So if you move quietly, process deeply, and build intentionally, don't confuse delayed recognition with a lower level of value. Different traits dominate different phases. And again, understanding what phase you're in gives you leverage. So that's all I got for today. If you liked what you heard, if you resonated with it, if you didn't even like what you heard, that's okay. Leave a comment, leave a like, share it with somebody, subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next one. This is Ghost Town on the Ground. Yeah.